My name is Elena Cruz, and on the night I turned 34, I learned the sound a heart makes when it stops trying to be polite. The maitre d' smiled with his eyes and apologized with his eyebrows for the third time. I'm sure your guest will be right along, Ms. Cruz. He set another glass of water the way a hospice nurse might adjust a blanket, gentle, practiced, mercifully brief. I nodded like everything was fine. That's the thing about upscale restaurants. The knives shine, the staff whispers, the pity is plated with parsley. The clock on the far wall glowed soft gold. I watched it tick across an hour, then another, while the ice in my cocktail sank and the stem of my glass got slippery from the condensation clinging to my fingers. My birthday candle had been held at the pass so long the dessert chef probably thought I'd invented a new course. Apology cake. I texted once, then twice, then not at all. Of course, I'd made excuses for Daniel before. He's buried under deadlines, I'd told friends. Traffic's a mess. He's terrible with time. The longer you love someone, the more creative you get at explaining the dents in the car you swear is brand new. At minute 119, I stood to leave. The city's noise outside beckoned like a second chance, honking taxis, motorbikes carving lanes of their own invention, a street vendor insisting his mangoes could cure anything, even birthdays. I reached for my jacket just as the room's hum shifted, that low, collective intake of breath that means a story is starting whether you asked for it or not. Daniel walked in. He did not walk alone. Her dress was the kind of black that laughs at other blacks. She wore it like a dare. Madison Lee, perfect hair, wrists stacked with bracelets that said, I am both expensive and bored. He had his hand in hers, and when they stopped at my table, she turned toward him with an amused tilt of her head and kissed him slowly, deliberately, like the kiss was less about him and more about the audience. The room quieted the way rooms do when money and cruelty hold hands. I didn't stand. I didn't gasp. I felt everything slide 5 feet away, like a chair you push back from a table. It was all still there, humiliation, confusion, anger, but separated from me by a pane of clean, merciful glass. Madison glanced at me over Daniel's shoulder. Told you she'd still be here. Loyal as a little dog, she said lightly, stage whisper bright enough for the next table to catch. Her smile was sugared poison. Daniel smirked the way boys do when they're trying on manhood and it doesn't quite fit. The waiter froze 2 tables over, holding a tray like a shield. Daniel gestured with a cheap shrug. Elena, what can I say? We ran into each other and figured you wouldn't mind if we made it a celebration. His mouth flexed on the word celebration like it was a chew toy. I watched, detached, the way you watch rain on glass. Pretty from here, inconvenient out there. In another life, 2 hours ago, last month, year 1, I would have defended myself against a crime I hadn't committed. I would have asked questions I already knew answers to. I would have performed heartbreak like a script stapled to my ribs. Instead, I set my napkin gently on the table, as if my name were embroidery I didn't want to crease. I stood, smoothing the skirt I'd chosen because it made me feel like a long exhale. I looked at Madison first, not Daniel. I don't know why. Maybe because she knew exactly what she was doing, and maybe I wanted to let her know I knew too. I offered her my hand. Madison, is it? Elena, happy to finally meet you. For a split second, her smile faltered. She took my hand reflexively, because trained people shake when hands appear. Her bracelets chimed, a bell on a cat. Daniel stared at our handshake like it was a math problem. Congratulations, I said evenly, turning now to him. You've made your choice. He opened his mouth. I don't know what he was going to say. Some clumsy thing about honesty or the elasticity of modern relationships. It didn't matter. I reached for my clutch, slid a crisp bill from the pocket I sew into every evening bag, and placed it on the table to cover the drinks I'd had while waiting for my future to stop pretending. To the kitchen, I told the waiter with a soft smile, for their patience. The kindness felt like a razor with a satin handle. Then I looked at Daniel for as long as it takes a light to turn green. I'm going home, I said. Enjoy the rest of your night, both of you. The restaurant inhaled. Someone's fork chimed against a plate. Madison shifted her weight, quick flick of a heel, like she'd chosen the wrong pair for a sprint. Daniel's smirk wobbled. Elena, don't be dramatic, he said. Classic, bored, like he'd rehearsed the line in the mirror with 3 different eyebrow angles. I'm not, I said. I'm finished. I turned and started toward the door. I didn't run. I didn't tremble. I didn't look back. The door's brass handle was cool in my palm, a small, honest thing reminding me that anything you can grip, you can open. Night hit like a blessing. The air smelled like rain that hadn't committed yet. Streetlights haloed puddles. Somewhere, a busker strangled a guitar until it told the truth. I walked down the steps and into the city that had always loved me in a way men rarely did. Noisy, indifferent, honest. People talk about moments that change everything as if they're meteors, flashbangs you can point to from a distance. Mine was quiet, a smudge of lipstick on someone else's mouth, a sentence tossed like a bone to see if I'd still fetch. The leash clipped itself off. The collar fell. I didn't cry in the cab. I watched buildings pass and thought about receipts, about how love, real love, itemizes. It accounts for small mercies, the coffee he remembers exactly how I drink it, the way he texts when my flight lands, the hand at the small of my back when rooms get loud. It also accounts for small cruelties, the delayed replies, the jokes that aren't jokes, the habit of showing up late and selling it as charm. My ledger had been balancing itself for months. I just hadn't checked the totals. By the time the cab pulled up to my building, I felt the inside of my chest like a room after a party, quiet, sticky, cups half full of other people's backwash. But there was space. God, there was so much space. The concierge glanced up. "Happy birthday, Ms. Cruz," he said. And if he noticed anything unusual about my face, his professionalism folded it into a drawer and shut it. "Thank you, Marco," I said. A quiet night after all. In the elevator, I watched my reflection multiply in the mirrored paneling. 4 Elenas, 8, 12. They all looked like they'd finally stepped into their own shoes. At the penthouse floor, the doors parted with a sigh. The corridor smelled faintly of jasmine from the planter I'd insisted on, even though everyone said it was too much upkeep. I unlocked my door, stepped inside, and stood for a moment in the dark, listening to the apartment remember I was the only one it had to hold. My phone vibrated, then again, then again, then again, his name lighting the screen, then a number I didn't have saved, then his name again with exclamation points as if punctuation were an apology. I set the phone face down on the entryway table and the room exhaled. The city's lights came in through the floor-to-ceiling glass and cut my living room into neat rectangles, the geometry of a life put back in order. I took off my earrings and set them in the dish shaped like a lily pad. I unzipped my dress and hung it carefully. I poured myself a small whiskey, neat, the way a surgeon might sterilize a scalpel. Ritual, steady, necessary. If you had asked me a year ago what I wanted by 34, I would have told you something about a trip to Sicily, about learning to make pasta the way grandmothers do, about a family that didn't feel like something you have to earn. Tonight I wanted exactly one thing, the truth, bright and ugly and freeing. The phone buzzed again, jittery little insect trapped under glass. I let it tire itself out. In the window, the city and I considered each other. How many women had stood here and counted the ways they made themselves smaller for men who called it love? I raised my glass to the skyline, to growth, I said softly, and to pruning. A memory surfaced, uninvited but useful. 2 months into dating, Daniel standing in this living room, turning slowly like he was on a tour. "It's wild that your landlord lets you do whatever you want up here," he'd said, gesturing at the bookshelves I'd filled, the rug I'd hunted down like a pilgrim. "Must be nice." "It is," I'd said then, because truth doesn't always require elaboration. He'd smiled, confident, and changed the subject to himself, as he often did. People hear what flatters them. They ignore what doesn't fit the life they're trying to rent on charm. Back at the restaurant, he'd thought he was staging a scene where I'd be the understudy forever, waiting, grateful, desperate to be cast again. Tonight he learned I prefer directing. Tomorrow he would learn who owns the theater. I finished my drink and set the glass down gently. I made a list on a sticky note with the same calm I reserve for tax season. Bags, locks, receipts, storage. Clarity is a kind of oxygen. You don't notice you've been choking until you breathe. Outside, sirens sighed and faded. Somewhere below, someone laughed, the kind of laugh that means a first date went well. Good for them. May they be kind and on time. May they mean their pleas and thank yous. May they never weaponize the patience of the person they say they love. My phone, finally quiet, lay face down like a child in timeout. I picked it up long enough to switch it to Do Not Disturb. In the morning, I'd read the pileup and decide which words to believe and which to archive. I already knew the answer. I turned off the living room lights. The city stayed. It always stays. He thought he'd broken me. He only broke the spell. Tomorrow, I would take inventory, and Daniel would learn that some doors, once closed, aren't locked to keep you out. They're locked because the person inside has finally come home. When dawn came, the light that slipped through the curtains didn't feel gentle. It was surgical, slicing open the room, revealing the aftermath. My birthday flowers on the table were wilted, leaning toward their own end. The champagne Daniel had promised to bring still sat unopened in the fridge, next to the slice of cake I'd bought myself just in case he forgot. He had. I sat on the couch with my coffee, staring at my reflection in the black screen of the TV. My face was calm, too calm. I looked like someone who'd already filed the paperwork on a dream. The phone started again. Calls, voicemails, a text from Daniel that read, "You're overreacting. Can we talk like adults?" Overreacting. The word tasted like rust. I set the phone down and looked around my living room. My living room. Every corner of this place had been touched by me, not him. I had paid for every light bulb, every plank of wood beneath our feet. Even the couch he'd insisted was ours. He had loved to say that word. Ours. Ours when I picked new furniture. Ours when I covered his rent after he temporarily quit his job. Ours when he bragged to his friends about our penthouse view. The truth? He'd never even seen the lease, because there wasn't one. There didn't need to be. I didn't rent this place. I owned it. Not just the apartment, the entire building. 4 years ago, I'd invested in it quietly through a holding company. The property had been undervalued, neglected. I saw potential. That's what I do. Find things people underestimate and give them worth again. The irony wasn't lost on me. Daniel had always assumed I was just comfortable. He'd once said, half-jokingly, "You're not one of those hidden millionaires, right?" I'd laughed and said, "Something like that." He thought it was a joke. He never cared enough to ask again. When I'd first met him, he was charming in that easy, unreliable way. Handsome, magnetic, the kind of man who made you feel seen just by tilting his head when you spoke. For a while, I thought his chaos was passion. I thought his spontaneity meant freedom. I mistook instability for excitement. It had started with small indulgences. He'd forget his wallet at dinner. I'd cover it. He'd lose his debit card. Again. I'd transfer money to his account. "Just until I get my next client payment," he'd say, flashing that boyish grin that made irresponsibility look like a personality trait. But somewhere along the way, gratitude turned into entitlement. His questions changed. "Why don't you ever treat yourself?" Became, "Why don't we have a better car?" He started hinting that my wardrobe was too simple, that my vacations were low-key. He wanted flash, designer labels, weekend trips, champagne instead of wine. When I told him I preferred substance over spectacle, he smiled and said, "You just don't know how to live." That was the moment I should have known. Last night's scene at the restaurant wasn't random. It was the performance he'd been building toward, one final, arrogant test. He wanted control, and humiliation was his way of proving he had it. I took another sip of coffee, cold now, and felt something settle inside me, a quiet, precise kind of fury. There are many ways to end a relationship. Some people write long letters. Some disappear. I preferred logistics. I stood, pulled my hair into a loose bun, and went to the storage closet. Inside were rolls of black garbage bags, the industrial kind I kept for donation drives. I tore one open. The sound, that sharp plastic rip, felt satisfying in a way I couldn't explain. Daniel's clothes hung in neat rows in the second bedroom. He'd taken over the space months ago, calling it his creative zone. Mostly it was a monument to laziness, racks of expensive jackets, shoes he never cleaned, gadgets he never used. One by one I started pulling things down. His shirts, his sneakers, his watch boxes. They all went into the bags. I didn't fold, I didn't sort, I just removed. By the fifth bag, the room smelled faintly of cologne and dust, like a memory refusing to die. I found his vision board taped to the wall. It had photos of luxury cars, beaches, a yacht, and in the center, a ring. Not a wedding ring, but a massive diamond from some ad campaign. He'd written under it in bold marker, "Manifest Abundance." I tore it down and dropped it into the sixth bag. "Manifest this," I muttered. It wasn't anger anymore, it was focus. The next step was simple: eliminate access. I called the locksmith. "Hi," I said calmly. "I need all my locks changed today. Front and service entrance." The man's voice was weary but kind. "Bad breakup?" "Just overdue maintenance," I said. He arrived within an hour, middle-aged, tired eyes, toolbox that rattled with stories. He didn't ask questions. Professionals rarely do. The new locks clicked into place like punctuation marks at the end of a long sentence. When he left, I paid him in cash and gave him a polite smile. "Good luck," he said quietly. "Already found it," I replied. 12 garbage bags lined the hallway. I stacked them neatly, as if tidiness could make this act of erasure more civilized. On top, I placed a small box: his watch, his notebooks, his toiletries. I'd labeled it "Daniel's Things" in my neatest handwriting. Inside, the apartment finally breathed again. The air felt lighter, quieter, mine. The phone started buzzing again. I ignored it. Then came a voicemail. His voice was slurred with the kind of panic that smells like regret. "Elena, this isn't funny. I just want to talk. We need to fix this before it gets worse." "Fix what? The illusion?" Another message followed, louder, meaner. "You're being crazy. Everyone's going to think you've lost it." I almost laughed. The man who publicly humiliated me was now worried about appearances. I silenced the phone, poured myself a small glass of whiskey, and sat near the window. The city sprawled below, indifferent, magnificent, alive. I liked that about it. It didn't care who owned what, who left whom. It just kept going. For the first time in a long time, so would I. I picked up my planner and turned to a blank page. At the top I wrote, "Phase 2, closure. Return his key to security. Inform management to deny future access. Block all numbers except emergency." It wasn't revenge, it was order. Before bed, I walked through the rooms. The kitchen he never cooked in, the living room he treated like a showroom, the balcony he'd always bragged about as his view. I stood there a moment, letting the cold air brush my face. Somewhere down below, a taxi honked and a woman laughed. Life continued, untouched by his absence. As I turned to go back inside, I whispered to the empty apartment. He thought this was his castle. He never realized he was just a guest. Inside, the lights reflected off the clean floor. My own shadow stretched tall across it. Silent proof that I was finally standing on my own ground. Tomorrow I'd face him, but not the way he expected. Tonight, I slept like someone who had finally remembered the meaning of peace. I woke up to silence that felt expensive. Not the awkward kind, but the kind that comes after you've paid for chaos too long and finally canceled the subscription. The city outside was already humming, but inside, everything was still. My phone was less peaceful. 78 missed calls, 32 unread messages, 5 new voicemails. Daniel's name was scattered through my notifications like debris from an explosion. I stared at it without touching the screen. There's a strange calm that comes after someone's tantrum loses its audience. The first voicemail began with mock concern. "Elena, please, you're blowing this out of proportion. Let's talk before this becomes embarrassing for both of us." The second was angrier. "You locked me out? Seriously? You don't get to just do that. This is my home too." I let them play in the background as I made breakfast. His voice followed me from room to room like a mosquito, buzzing, persistent. Easy to ignore if you've already chosen not to bleed. Halfway through my coffee, the intercom buzzed. I glanced at the security feed on my phone, and there he was. Daniel stood in the hallway, disheveled and furious, flanked by someone I didn't expect to see so soon, Madison Lee. Her perfect hair looked less perfect in the daylight, and the gloss of last night's confidence had dulled into confusion. They were standing in front of 12 black garbage bags. My black garbage bags. Madison said something I couldn't hear, gesturing at the pile. Daniel kicked one of the bags, then pounded on my door. "Elena, open the damn door!" I sipped my coffee, watched, waited. The pounding turned into shouting. "You can't just throw me out like trash. Are you insane?" Then softer, as if remembering the cameras in the hallway. "Look, let's just talk. You're making a scene." "I'm making a scene." "Of course." The irony almost made me laugh. I put the coffee down, straightened my robe, and unlocked the door, just a crack. Daniel froze mid-sentence. Madison's eyes flicked to mine, wary, like she'd walked into a play she didn't audition for. "Good morning," I said evenly. "You're up early." "What is this?" Daniel snapped, waving a hand toward the bags. "You think this is funny?" "No," I said, "just tidy." He blinked. "Tidy? Elena, you can't just throw my things out in the hall. My key doesn't even work." "It shouldn't," I interrupted, calm as the surface of a lake. "Locks were changed last night." Madison frowned. "Wait, your key doesn't work? Daniel, what's going on?" He shot her a look, the kind men use when their lies start overlapping. "She's just overreacting." I opened the door a little wider, just enough for them to see me. Hair unbrushed, robe cinched, calm in a way that terrified him. "Daniel," I said softly, "you told Madison last night that this was your place, didn't you?" His jaw clenched. "It is my place. My name's on the lease." "Is it?" I asked, tilting my head. "Would you like to see it?" He hesitated. "Don't play games." "Oh, I'm not playing." I turned, walked to the hall table, and picked up a folder I'd prepared for this exact moment. Inside was a copy of the property deed, stamped and notarized, with my name and my holding company clearly printed at the top. I handed it through the doorway. "Here," I said. "Page 2, Section 4. You'll see my signature." He looked down at the papers, then back up, confusion flickering into disbelief. Madison leaned closer, reading over his shoulder. Her lips parted slightly. "Elena Cruz Holdings," she murmured. Daniel's face drained of color. "You're lying." I smiled faintly. "If I were, you'd have no problem finding your name on there. Go ahead, check." He couldn't. "You never told me you owned this place," he said quietly, almost like a child caught sneaking candy. "I didn't think it was relevant," I said, "until you decided to humiliate me in public and call me loyal like it was an insult." Madison took a slow step back. "You own the building?" "Yes," I said. "Every apartment, every key, every lock." Then to Daniel, "And as of midnight, you don't live in any of them." He blinked, like the sentence didn't compute. "You can't just— evictions don't work like that." "Oh, don't worry. You were never a tenant. You never signed a lease, never paid rent. You were a guest, the kind that overstayed his welcome." His voice cracked. "You can't do this to me." "I already did." He turned to Madison, desperate. "She's bluffing. She's—" Madison stepped away from him, slowly, like backing away from a cliff's edge. "Daniel, you said this was your apartment." It was. It wasn't," I said. "And now, neither of you belong here." He glared at me, his composure fraying. "You're unbelievable." "Thank you," I said. "You have 10 minutes to clear your things from the hallway before security removes them. After that, they'll be disposed of." He opened his mouth again, but I was already closing the door. 10 minutes, Daniel," I said through the crack. "Don't make me count." The deadbolt clicked. I leaned against the door and listened. For a moment, silence, then muffled yelling, the thud of shoes against carpet, Madison's voice rising. "You didn't tell me she owned the building?" Followed by Daniel's muttered excuses. I switched to the security feed again. The camera caught everything in cold grayscale. Daniel gesturing wildly, Madison shaking her head, the two of them surrounded by garbage bags that looked oddly poetic. Finally, Madison turned on her heel and pressed the elevator button. Daniel reached for her arm. She pulled it away. The doors opened, she stepped in, and she didn't look back. He stood there, alone now, in a hallway that didn't belong to him. After a long moment, he sank down onto one of the bags, head in his hands. I watched him through the screen until the timer on my phone buzzed. 10 minutes. I called down to building security. "Unit 17, I said. "Please clear the hallway." "Yes, Ms. Cruz," came the reply. "Everything okay?" "Perfectly," I said. "Just taking out the trash." As they moved in, I watched Daniel scramble to collect his things, pleading, arguing. But it was over. The door between us stayed closed. When the hallway was finally empty, I turned off the feed. I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat by the window again. The city was bright now, unbothered, alive, entirely indifferent to one man's unraveling. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something that wasn't anger or sadness. It was peace. Not the fragile kind that comes after an apology, but the durable kind that comes when you no longer need one. He had called me loyal like it was a weakness. He mistook patience for permission. Now the only thing he'd ever be waiting for from me was silence. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that people like Daniel never vanish quietly. They flail, they scheme, they rewrite history with themselves as the hero. And me, the unstable ex who went too far. The messages started the next day. Not from him, at least not directly. From mutual friends. From acquaintances who barely knew us. From people who'd once envied the version of our relationship he'd paraded online. Hey, Elena, are you okay? I heard you threw Daniel out. He's saying you had some kind of breakdown? What happened at that restaurant? He looked devastated. I scrolled through them all in silence, my thumb hovering over reply. I didn't respond. Not yet. By noon, his version of the story was spreading faster than truth ever could. He'd told people I'd lost control, that I'd humiliated him for no reason, that I'd changed the locks in some jealous rage. In his story, he'd tried to gently end things, at my birthday dinner, apparently, and I'd reacted cruelly. Convenient how selective memory becomes when it's cornered. I let him have his performance. I wasn't going to compete with it, but I also wasn't going to let it stand. That afternoon, I made one call to Talia, a mutual friend who'd been at the restaurant that night. When she picked up, her voice was cautious. Elena, I don't know what to believe. Daniel's saying he brought his ex to my birthday dinner, I said, calm, almost clinical. Kissed her in front of me, called me a loyal dog for waiting. Silence. Then the sharp inhale of realization. Oh my God, she whispered. I was at the bar that night. I saw him with her, but I didn't know. I didn't need to say more. Truth doesn't require embellishment when it's that ugly. By evening, the tide began to turn. One by one, messages changed tone. I'm so sorry, Elena. I can't believe he did that. You handled it better than I ever could. And just like that, the narrative shifted back to where it belonged, reality. But Daniel wasn't done. 2 days later, my bank sent a fraud alert. A charge attempt. $5,200 at a designer boutique in Beverly Hills. The name on the supplementary card? Daniel Harper. I'd forgotten he even had one. I'd given it to him months ago, back when we were partners, back when I still believed generosity was a love language instead of a liability. The charge had been declined, thankfully, but I called the company anyway. Report it stolen, I said, and cancel the account. The representative's voice was polite but curious. Will you be needing a replacement for your secondary cardholder, ma'am? I smiled into the phone. No, I think he's already replaced himself. That night another call came, not from Daniel, from his mother. I recognized her tone before I even recognized her number, the kind of condescension only an entitled woman can perfect. Elena, she began sharply, I just got off the phone with Daniel. He says you threw him out of his home. You left him on the street. I almost laughed. His home, I said evenly. That's interesting, considering his name was never on a single document. You don't understand, she snapped. He told me you've been unstable, controlling. He's living off me for 2 years, I interrupted. And when that didn't work anymore, he tried to humiliate me publicly. He forgot I owned the place he was squatting in. Her voice cracked with outrage. You can't talk to me like that. Then don't call me like this, I replied. If you have any further concerns, you can direct them to my lawyer. Before she could speak again, I gave her his name and number and hung up. The silence that followed was pure oxygen. 3 days of quiet passed. I filled them with work, errands, and small luxuries, sleeping late, eating breakfast on the balcony, watering the plants Daniel always said were a waste of money. But peace has a funny way of ending itself. The next week, an email arrived. The sender, Julian Parker. The subject line, apology. For a moment, I didn't recognize the name. Then I remembered. Madison's new boyfriend. The man Daniel had dragged into his theater of humiliation. The email was short, but honest. Elena, I owe you an apology. Daniel told Madison and me that you were manipulative and emotionally unstable, that you controlled him and wouldn't let him leave. He said the dinner was to end things publicly because he was afraid of you. I believed him. But after what happened at your apartment, I realized I'd been used. Madison's embarrassed. I'm disgusted. He's been calling both of us nonstop, begging for money and a place to stay. For what it's worth, you handled that night with more grace than anyone I've ever met. You dodged a bullet. Julian. I read it twice, then once more for the symmetry of it. The man who helped humiliate me now offering me closure in his own quiet way. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Instead, I forwarded the email to myself, then archived it. Proof, if I ever needed it, that the universe has an impeccable sense of irony. Daniel's smear campaign had failed. His finances had failed. His pride was crumbling piece by piece under the weight of his own lies. But I wasn't gloating. Some victories aren't loud. They don't need to be paraded or posted or shouted across group chats. Some victories are as simple as a quiet morning where your phone stays still. No calls, no drama, no ghosts from the past clawing for attention. That night, as I stood on my balcony, watching the city lights blink like tired eyes, I whispered to myself, "Let him talk. The truth doesn't need to run, it waits." Tomorrow would bring silence. And for once, I wasn't afraid of it. Months have a way of softening sharp things. The fury, the humiliation, even the satisfaction. All of it dulled until it was nothing more than texture under my skin. Life became rhythmic again, almost ordinary, and God, it felt good. I redecorated the apartment, stripping away every trace of him. The couch he insisted on, gone. The whiskey glasses he claimed made him feel like a CEO, replaced with ceramic mugs that didn't pretend to be anything more than what they were. Even the scent of his cologne, that overconfident mix of cedar and ego, had finally faded. It was quiet now, real quiet, the kind that doesn't ache. Work filled the days. Friends filled the evenings. For the first time in years, I didn't have to schedule my happiness around someone else's moods. Still, sometimes I'd catch myself glancing at the door when my phone buzzed, expecting his name, the ghost of old habits. But it was never him, not anymore. One Thursday evening, I met my friends for drinks at a small bar downtown, a place Daniel and I used to go to when he wanted to be seen. It had one of those dim, golden interiors where everyone looked slightly better than they really were. I almost didn't go, but something in me wanted to face it, to see the world he once occupied and know it couldn't touch me anymore. We took a corner table. The music was low, the air smelled faintly of lime and burnt sugar. My friends laughed, their words buzzing like champagne bubbles. I was mid-sentence when I felt it, that subtle prickle of recognition at the back of my neck. I looked up. Behind the bar, polishing a glass with slow, distracted hands, was Daniel. For a second, the world folded in on itself. Same face, same crooked smile, but smaller somehow. Dimmed. His hair was longer, unkempt. The confident posture I remembered was gone, replaced by the slouch of someone learning humility one shift at a time. He didn't see me immediately. He was too busy avoiding his reflection in the mirror behind the bottles. When our eyes finally met, it was like time hiccuped. The noise around us fell away. He froze. A flash of disbelief, then shame. I watched his jaw tighten, his shoulders square, as if trying to piece back together the version of himself he used to be. But it didn't fit anymore. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Then I did something that surprised even me. I smiled. Not mockingly, not cruelly, just peacefully. A quiet acknowledgement, a full stop at the end of a long sentence. He looked like he wanted to speak, to say something rehearsed, maybe an apology, maybe an excuse, but the bartender next to him called for a hand and he turned away. The moment passed like a breeze through an open window, gone before it could settle. I turned back to my friends who hadn't noticed the exchange. One of them was telling a story about her new job, her voice full of excitement. I listened, genuinely. I laughed at the right moments. My drink sweated lightly against my palm. The world kept spinning, perfectly balanced, without him at its center. A few minutes later, I glanced toward the bar again. Daniel was gone, replaced by another bartender. Maybe he'd slipped into the back room. Maybe he couldn't bear the sight of me. I didn't check. I didn't need to. That was the thing about closure. It didn't come in grand speeches or tearful apologies. Sometimes it arrived quietly, disguised as indifference. When we left the bar, the night air was cool and forgiving. The city lights shimmered on the pavement like constellations for the tired. As we walked, my friend looped her arm through mine. "You look lighter lately," she said with a smile, like something finally let go. I thought about Daniel, about the restaurant, about the bags in the hallway, the locksmith, the silence afterward, about how much space I'd once given to someone who didn't know how to stay. "I think it's the quiet," I said softly. "I finally got used to it." She laughed. "Most people hate quiet." "Not me," I said. "Quiet doesn't lie." At home, I slipped off my heels, poured myself a glass of water, and stood by the window. The city glowed below, endless, alive. Somewhere out there, he was probably wiping down a counter, telling someone a version of our story that made him the victim. That was fine. Let him keep it. The truth didn't need defending anymore. I'd spent too many years mistaking patience for love, forgiveness for obligation. I'd waited, listened, explained, all for someone who only heard his own voice. Now I owed him nothing, not a word, not a thought, not even resentment. I traced a finger along the window pane, watching the lights blur. He once called me loyal, like it was an insult. He thought loyalty meant waiting, sitting, staying, forgiving. But he never understood what loyalty really was. Loyalty isn't staying with someone who disrespects you. It's staying true to yourself when you finally decide to leave. I finished my water and set the glass down carefully. "Good night," I whispered. Not to him, not to anyone, just to the story that had finally run out of pages. And for the first time since that night at the restaurant, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. It felt like peace.